Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book Star Trek The Next Generation Imzadi by Peter David. This is one of the few coveted hardcovers that Star Trek published for The Next Generation. They don't publish hardcovers that often in Star Trek publishing, so when they do, it's a pretty big deal, especially back in the 90s when this came out. And this is the second of the hardcovers for The Next Generation, and it is the romance backstory, front story, and unique story for Deanna Troi and Riker. And their romance is called, between them, is called Imzadi, which is why that's the title of the book. I actually found this book in mass market form years ago, and I accidentally spilled some, not spilled some water. I was walking through the rain, it was in my book bag. I was planning to read it back in like 2020, or maybe 2021. Anyway, I was planning to read it, got water on it. At the time, it was really messed up. Now it's not as messed up anymore, but I was like, I felt nervous about reading it. But I did get it signed by Peter David at a convention. It was great to meet him there. And but I waited till I got the hardcover. I was able to find it at a local bookstore, and I read the hardcover. And there is some great storytelling in this book, and there's some stuff in this book. When I mentioned the stuff that I saw in this book, one of my friends said, "Yep, sounds like a Peter David book." And I was like, okay, well, I didn't see that coming. This book, as far as I can tell, is actually one of, if not the best-selling Star Trek book of all time. You know, most Star Trek books have under 1,000 reviews on Goodreads, and there's a few that get into the multi-thousand review range. The Destiny trilogy has a couple thousand reviews each. The original novelizations have a couple thousand reviews each. I think the original novelization of the movie has like about 4,000 reviews. That's one of the highest rated ones. Not highest rated in terms of the rating, but in terms of most ratings. This one has over 6,000 ratings on Goodreads. And just from what I could tell in my research online, this also is the best-selling Star Trek novel. And I can certainly understand why that this one would move copies. It's an exciting book. It's got tie-ins to the original series. It's got this great sweeping romance. It's got this great sweeping storyline that goes through the future and the past and time travel. It's got a lot of great elements to it. But there's some not so great elements. So let me start with the great. The great stuff in this book is the third act. The third act of this book is pure action. It's pure time travel, timey-wimey stuff that you might see in a Doctor Who episode, or, to be honest, in a Star Trek episode, or a Star Trek movie for that matter. Stuff that you would see in a time travel storyline. And it is exciting. It leaves you on the edge of your seat. Character motivation and character changes are happening in the third act of this book that really make you just really nervous for the characters. And because this book came out while the show was on, there's an element of, everyone's kind of safe, like it's going to end up okay, but there's an element that makes you think, maybe not. The first part of the book is a flash forward to the future, and you see a world where Deanna Troi, well, I don't know if I can spoil that. I'll say Riker did not end up with Deanna Troi, and he is a broken, miserable man. And he is haunted by that, and he is called to the deathbed of someone on Beta Z, and it is a big deal. And anyway, that's all I'll say for the opening. And then he spends the middle portion of the book kind of recounting his past, not only of what happened with him and Deanna that caused all this heartbreak, but also what was their initial romance when he was first on Beta Z, when they were both young adults. And that's the middle portion of the book. And that was the most frustrating portion of the book. Because this is a pretty R-rated book. This is a pretty R-rated book. I don't think it would be considered X-rated, but it's an R-rated book, that's for sure. And most of the Star Trek books I've read have been PG-13, like solidly. There's like references to characters being spending the night together, but it's vague. It's it's not explicit, and what you do see is like morning after the character is getting changed. Like you're not seeing the explicit stuff in Star Trek books, mostly because the TV shows they weren't PG-13. I think they were either PG or they're TV-14. Now they're getting into R-rated stuff with the new shows, but that's a totally different thing. But this stuff is generally Star Trek novels generally tend to be PG-13. So to read a book that is like a hard R Star Trek book is just kind of frustrating, especially since none of the others are kind of like that. And it's not just for a sequence. One of my problems with John Jackson Miller's book was he never writes any bad stuff in his books, and then all of a sudden when he did his Picard novel, he included like a few scenes that were just like, really, John, why'd you include this? But I don't fault the book too much for it because A, that was what the Picard novels were doing, and B, because it was just like one or two scenes. This is like the whole middle portion of this book has to do with sexual elements. Like that's the whole middle portion of the book. It's supposed to be a hard R romance between Deanna Troi and Riker. And I could see how there are in-universe reasons why things are happening. Like Riker goes to a wedding on Beta Z, and if you know how they do weddings on Beta Z, you know what happens at a wedding on Beta Z. That is not appropriate. There's also elements of their romance together, his romance with other people, other women in the book, and so there's so much in this middle portion of this book. I know I described it to my friend as a Bodice Ripper. That's really what the middle portion of this book is. And it's just so frustrating because I don't like reading about that. I am a sucker for cheesy romances. I love cheesy romances in my books. I love romance in my science fiction fantasy. I don't really read like pure romance novels, but give me a science fiction fantasy novel with a solid cheesy romance plot and I will eat it up. But that's not what this is. This is like the Bodice Ripper erotica, basically. And I'm just like, I don't appreciate that in the books. I don't need to read that. I can read about the characters falling in love without reading about blah, 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 blah. And I can see so many, there's in-universe reasons. There's reasons why the story had to include them. And you could list them out. And I'm just like, yes, but there's also ways you could do the same thing without describing it, without going into this detail. And it's just the language of the book is laced with that type of writing. The way that characters talk about other characters, the way they describe their features, the way that they think about other people. It's just so frustrating. Anyway, moving on from that element, again, the third act in this book is brilliant, is so well done. The themes about, what Riker does when he thinks Deanna Troi's life is in danger in the third act of this book is brilliant. And having the kind of time travel, timey-wimey stuff is a lot like the Voyager finale, which I love the Voyager finale. And so that stuff just put a smile on my face. I thought the third act of this book was just so perfect, just so entertaining. And the third act of this book is like, I can see why people put it on the pedestal. I can see why everyone bought the book back in the day, but I don't think that everyone would hold it to such a high standard today. But I could see why everyone bought it. But it's still, even today, still has quite a lot of people saying, this is my favorite Star Trek novel. This is the best Star Trek novel. And from the third act of this book, I can kind of see it. I can see why you'd say that, but not from the second act of the book. Woo! There are so many connections and so many things about this book that just work so well. There's some stuff with Wesley Crusher that is just so nice to see in this book. There's some stuff with Data. Does Data go on a weird journey in this book in the third act? I mean, I understand why he did it, but my goodness, Data, like, whoo! Anyway, there's just so much that I loved about the third act and so much I did not love about the second act, which is why this is such a mixed review. I'm going to give it like a 7.5 out of 10. I still think in terms of being entertaining, I guarantee you this is one of the more entertaining Star Trek books, and there's not too much action. The third act has a ton of action. The second act has all the romance action. And then the first act has not a lot of action. The first act is hard to get into because you're in the future. You're seeing the future where they're not together, and it's kind of bleak and it's kind of hard. It's not written most clearly. You kind of have to get into it. So the opening is a little tough to get into, but then you kind of find your footing in acts 2 and 3. And it's also weird because they decide to start with the end, and then they go to the epilogue, and then they go to the middle, and then they go to the beginning, and then the end of the beginning, and it's like, what? It's time travel. I know he was trying to be kind of clever in his parts. So you start at the end, but I thought it was a little weird. But anyway, I enjoyed the book. I think it's a well-produced book. That's why I gave it like a 7 or 7.5 out of 10. But I do not appreciate the R-rated elements of the book. Woo, boy, do I not appreciate them in the book. I read another book recently which had a terrific romance, and it was not this R-rated stuff. And I can hold these two books and I say, both examples of romances. One shows you can do it without the hard R stuff, and then one shows you don't have to. So anyway, that's my review of Imzadi. I'm sure there's people who thought this was that romance stuff was well done. But what did you think of the book? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.